watching the Jennylyn show, and I'm Jennylyn Gleave, your host. And tonight, my guest is my friend Mel Van Dusen. Mel is also a television producer here, and his focus has been merely on near-death experiences, amongst lots of other fascinating topics that he's covered. But he has done over 100 cases of near-death experiences, and I have been fascinated with some of his work. And tonight, I thought it would be nice to have him join us on the set to share with us the differences that he heard from people who believed in God and what their experience was like versus the non-believers. Mel, thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jennylyn.
I know that you cover something that's really fascinating to me. I believe these people's stories. And so tonight, let's start with the ones that really jumped out at you when you interviewed them, that who believed, or you tell us how you want to start. But I want to hear the differences, and I'm sure my viewers do as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first person I interviewed was Nadia McCaffrey, and she's kind of become very well known. She's been on Larry King and a bunch of other programs because her son was training troops, American troops in Iraq, and he was killed by the troops that he was training.
Right.
And so there was a ban on having the coffins come back and having them televised. She wasn't going to have any of that. She decided if her son is going to be coming back home, he's not going to be coming back in darkness. And so she invited the press, and they covered it, and it made a huge fuss. I talked with her right before I came on the show, you know, asking her for some advice about how I could maybe approach this subject. And she said she doesn't think she could have broken the laws in this way, you know, to stick up for herself if she hadn't had a near-death experience, because she's no longer afraid of death, having had one or had near-death experience herself, and therefore she's not afraid of anything, not even these generals who were threatening her with one thing or another. She just wouldn't have any of it, and she's been very firm in what she feels is true. So I had her on my show for the first time.
Why would they ban them? Why would they? I don't understand. I didn't even know they banned them.
Well, it was kind of bad PR.
Oh, okay.
You know, for the country, having the coffins show up.
Okay, so what did she tell you about her near death?
Well, when she was about 7 years old, she was living in France.
By the way, was she a believer?
She went to Catholic schools,
okay.
And, you know, many people, when they go to Catholic schools, they just go along with what they're taught.
Right.
But she wanted to collect some flowers, and so she lived on a big estate in France, and she went out into the field, was trying to collect some flowers, and she was bitten by a snake. And she screamed. She knew what this meant. You know, it was a deadly snake. And so her relatives came and got her, and her legs swelled up, and then she went into a coma, and it was at that point that she had an out-of-body experience and saw all the commotion going on down below. And what happened was that in her near-death experience, she saw a radiant woman of light suspended in air, and the woman introduced herself as your little lady in the sky, something like that. And this completely changed her life because this event occurred in a different dimension.
Really?
Yeah, and so once you cross this threshold into this other dimension, it's almost impossible to talk about what's going on because it's not like anything we've experienced here, and it's nothing like we can communicate.
Was she pronounced dead by the doctors?
No, but she came very, very close to it. But she eventually came out of the coma. And then, years later, she became so homesick for this experience that she took an overdose of pills, tried to kill herself. And
why? Because she liked being dead so much?
Well, it's not being dead. She liked being on the other side. I mean, it was such a beautiful experience for her. It was everything she could ever wanted. And so she took an overdose and, was rushed to the hospital. And what happened, she went again to the light.
Yes.
but she heard this booming voice, don't do that again. And it was a voice that she could never forget. And so she felt that she was rejected by what was going on the other side. And then years later, she became kind of a care worker for people who were dying, because she had this empathic experience of what it's like to die, and she wanted to help other people. And she was, there was a woman dying, and she was in bed, and Nadia had her hand on her, and she noticed that she was enveloped in this golden light just as the woman was passing away. She felt her hair, and it was a color that she had never seen before. So now Nadia is trying to help veterans coming back from service.
So your take, based on what she told you, is when she died naturally by the snake versus the time when she tried to kill herself, were two opposite experiences.
Well, in one, when she tried to kill herself, she saw the light and realized that was a terrible mistake. We don't do that.
You have to wait until it happens.
Right, right.
Okay. So what was the person that you, tell us about one of the people you interviewed who didn't believe in anything, like in a God or a higher power. What was their experience like? What did they tell you happened when they went?
It was the last person I interviewed, Nancy Rhines. She was riding her bike in Colorado, and she was run over by an SUV. The woman was texting and didn't pay attention to where she was going and plowed into Nancy. Nancy broke 27 bones, I think it was, many of them in her spine. So she had to be rushed to the hospital, and they put stents in it. And she crossed over and met a woman who she called her guide, and she just stayed in this. By the way, Nancy was an atheist.
Okay, she didn't.
No, not at all. She hovered between agnosticism and atheism, and at the time of the accident, she was an atheist. And when she got to this other realm, she thought, you know, I must be dead. And she said, you know, what am I doing here? I don't even believe in this stuff. And so anyway, she felt that she was in this other realm for maybe 2 or 3 months. In actuality, she was only there for maybe 2 hours. But their sense of time over there is radically different from what it is here. In fact, you can almost say that there is no time there.
Okay.
And space is completely different. I asked her, you didn't believe in God. What was the God that you didn't believe in? And she said, I don't believe in, you know, the man sitting on a cloud with a white beard, a white male. I just didn't believe in that. And I said, well, this experience of yours was God to you. Could you have even imagined what that was like before you had this experience? And she said, no, there was no possible way I could have even believed in something that, because there's no way to describe it.
What is she now? Is she a believer now? Or is she still?
Well, belief is not the point. She knows.
She knows.
Right.
She experienced God.
This realm that she was in, she would call that God, I think.
Okay, okay.
Many of these people, they don't experience God as a person, they experience God as an experience.
Okay.
So the whole thing is self-confirming. You can call it God, you can call it the infinite, you can call it the eternal. Really, there's no name for it. But they're no longer atheists
when they come back.
Right.
So you've done over 100 cases. You should have tons of stories to tell me. Which have you ever interviewed anyone who has died and then come back, who came back with the same feeling before they left? Like, there's all this talk about a God and going to a better place is just fabricated, or some kind of neurological experience is happening to you when you cross over. Have you gotten any of that, or has everyone come back changed with the belief that, or with the philosophy that supports God?
Well, they might not refer to it as God, but their lives are definitely changed.
And they've all been different because of the experience.
They've all been changed by it, yeah.
Have you seen anybody who's worse because of it, or is everybody better?
Well, one thing people maybe could ask themselves is, who am I? What am I? People have an idea of self, and this idea they have of self is really kind of fictitious. In fact, it doesn't exist, and it never did exist. But in order to live in this world, it's helpful to have an idea of a sense of identity, a sense of ego,
Right.
so that you can function in it. When you cross to the other side, you see that that's false.
What, that you shouldn't have identity?
No, the idea that you had about yourself was erroneous. And oftentimes the idea that you've had about yourself is, it's self-centered. You want what's best for me. You think I'm in a three-dimensional world. What matters here is matter. The more things, maybe the better. Sex is very important. We've got to have a lot of it, or we've got to have fun doing it. We've got to have many experiences. My experiences have to be more interesting than other people's experiences. Right. So this is this kind of an idea that the self that people have, or they do what they think is expected of them. And the sad thing is that many people come to the end of their lives having done everything they thought was expected of them without really stopping to think, how do they want to live? How do I want to live? And when these people come back, the false self they had before is gone, and what replaces it is the values of the world that they were in.
So they come back more compassionate.
Yes.
So then is it fair to say, because when you think about it as a baby, and I've been seeing a lot of people posting stuff about babies being born with no type of agenda, no prejudices, none of that. Mm-hmm. They're just beings that love everybody who's nice to them. Mm-hmm. So where do you think that conditioning changes and people become, if it's a white supremacist, if it's a, whatever behaviors we develop that don't serve us and others, where do you think that happens based on your experiences with these people?
Well, it happens with their upbringing. Also, when babies are born, they're not blank slates.
They're not blank slates?
No, they have
wiring.
They're kind of wired to
right.
be in a particular way. Now you can speculate about how that is. You can say they come into this world with a certain karma. They come into this world with a certain agenda that they have to accomplish. But it's a mixture of what they come in with and what kind of a world they're in that conditions them. Mm-hmm. I was listening to one of the people that I interviewed some time ago, Robert Schwartz, and he says that the soul comes from a place of love before you're born, but it doesn't know, the soul doesn't know itself, because all there is in that world is love. So it has nothing to compare that with, and it's helpful to come into the world of duality where there isn't just love, so that they can have the experience of being put in difficult situations so that they can learn to love. And in that way, he says, their soul grows and matures. It's helpful to be in a world of duality, in a world of thickness, so that you can be tested in this way.
So if you've done over 100 cases of near-death experiences, what is the common thread? The one thing that everyone who believed shared with you versus what the people who don't and didn't believe? What was their experience?
You mean people who don't have a
it's like
experience?
When they die, do they all go to the same place? Or if you believe, you go to a different place versus if you didn't believe in a higher power or a God of some type?
It doesn't matter.
Everybody goes to the same place.
You can believe in God or not. When you die, the same thing happens.
A lot of
Or
religions teach the opposite. They say, if you were someone who was going around with an axe chopping heads off, you're not going to go to the place where the compassionate kind, Mahatma Gandhi, Mother Teresa is going. Is that erroneous?
Well, I brought this papyrus here. This, the original is 1300 BC.
Okay.
And this is the papyrus of Ani. And this is a depiction of the Egyptian afterlife from the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
Yeah.
And here we have the deceased soul over here being led by Anubis to a scale. I mean, this is the judgment scene. Many people are familiar with this or have seen it. And there's a scale over here, and the heart, which is considered who you are in your inmost essence, you know, that records your deeds and so on. It's weighed against a feather. So if you've accumulated a lot of bad deeds, then it will not match up with the weightlessness of a feather. And there's this demon here, and the heart will be eaten.
Yes, because I was going to say, he looks evil because he has that kind of...
Well, this is the demon that eats people here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so he'll eat the heart, and you can't go on to the afterlife, which is presided over by Osiris.
And this is what Egyptians believe.
Right. And so here we have the self being weighed. You know, I think the purpose of this life is to look at yourself and see, what is this self? You know, is this real or not? You know, what is this self up to?
Well, what have you heard from people who believe that your spirit is reborn? It's like, I was told not so long ago by someone whose philosophy, and actually it really resonated with me, because it adds up the reason that, like, all the religions, you know, culminate to good. Whether you believe in Hinduism or Muslims or whatever, it's all supposed to culminate to the same God, who is the highest power of all. And there are pathways to this God. And that the whole life thing is a horseshoe. And that we come here and we have to go through different experiences and lessons. And if we complete it the way it was intended when we left God, then we go back to God, whose house has many mansions. And depending on what phase you are in your life, you go there when you pass away. What do you think about that? Has anybody spoken to that you've interviewed?
We began this with rebirth.
Well, apparently they say that our souls comes back to learn different lessons, and we could come back as a man or a woman.
Yeah.
We all come back as children, but we grow into a man or a woman.
Yeah. Yesterday I went to a Zen Buddhist center, and I asked some of the monks there, and they don't have a clue.
Well, I want to hear from you what people who have died, what have they said about this whole concept? Anything?
40% of near-death experiencers have some sense of rebirth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you had anybody on your interviews, on your show, that saw Jesus? Because I have had a couple of interviews, and they've told me they've seen Jesus and they've described him differently. And apparently the belief is he reveals himself differently to different people.
Well, there's Mary Neal. She's an orthopedic surgeon. She wrote a best-selling book.
I read her book.
You did?
Yes, I have it.
Yeah. I heard her talk. I didn't interview her. But she said she saw Jesus on the other side. Okay, what color eyes did he have? Someone asked her, and she said, you know, that's difficult. The best she could come up with was that his eyes were all colors.
Yes, I was told that too by someone.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. And then his robe was kind of fantastic. What about the path leading to this domed structure that you were going? What was that like? It was infinite. You know, it went on infinitely. And she said, so did she herself. And she said she talked with this figure she called Jesus for quite a while. You know, if you're in a culture where Jesus is in it, you may see Jesus. If you're in a culture where Buddha predominates, you might see Buddha. But, you know, if you've been brought up in the highlands of New Guinea, you know, you're not going to see Jesus.
So basically,
It could
Whomever
be,
you're worshiping, that's who reveals themselves to you, so they all exist.
well, it could be a projection,
Okay.
depending on your culture.
But then when you die and your physical body that houses your brain dies, how can you then project? Because now it's just, you're just a spirit.
You know, when you consider a person's memory,
Yes, it's in there.
well, how could anyone possibly remember, you know, all of their life experiences? Let's say in a life review.
Yeah.
I don't. The brain is not equipped to remember all of that.
You don't think so?
No.
I think it's just that we don't tap into it, but I think it's in there somewhere, no?
No. The brain could have a facilitating function, not a producing function. That means that consciousness could be in a non-local realm. That's kind of difficult to get your mind around, but it already exists. If you have a mystical experience, you know, you might feel that all of a sudden, you know, you thought your consciousness was in your head. You know, there was some kind of figure in here looking out at the world.
Yes.
I'm looking out at my hand right now. It's connected to me. I must be in here. My hand is down here. I own it because it's connected to the rest of me. In non-local consciousness, you don't exist anywhere. You could exist everywhere. And when people have a near-death experience, it happens in this non-local reality.
Got it.
And that's been confirmed by, you know, some ideas in quantum physics that I can't repeat because it's over my head. But people who know about these things have told me that that's probably the way it is. And the mind is actually a reducing valve. In order to live in this world, we can't be aware of everything that we could be aware of in non-local reality. And so the brain acts as a funnel to kind of dumb us down so that we can just be aware of what's in a three-dimensional world. And when you have a near-death experience, there's no reason to have an ego anymore, or even a body or a brain, and so the so-called rigidity of the reducing valve is lessened, and you can have an experience of much more than you would normally have been aware of.
So we are down to 5 minutes.
Are you kidding?
No, I'm not. So how has all of these affected you as a person? Listening to all these different stories, you have done the most near-death experiences of anyone that I know. I'm not saying other people haven't done more, but you're the only one I know who's done this much. How is this affecting you as a person and the choices you're making and your philosophy?
That's a good question. You know, my mother told me when I was young that she had an out-of-body experience. She nearly died when she was 20. And she was floating on the ceiling, and she looked at herself down there, and in the morning she told the doctors that she was on the ceiling all night looking down, and the doctors told her, you know, that's interesting because we nearly lost you last night. And then, maybe 20 years ago, my mother told me that she saw my deceased father and her sister and her father.
Where? When? How?
In the house. One of the walking down the hall, her father sat on the bed. Her sister came into the room and said, everything is going to be all right. Mel is here to take care of you. But what was really freaked me out
was she ill?
No.
Was she dying?
No.
Okay.
No. But when she saw my father, I was there when she saw him. And I was in the doorway to her room. And she was in bed. And she looked past me kind of shocked. You know, like that.
Yeah.
And I said, Mom, what is it? He said, it's your father.
Was she drinking too much?
No.
Wow.
And then the neighbor lady, she and my mother were really good friends. And but she had to go to the hospital and have surgery. And during surgery, she became paralyzed on one side. Her kidneys failed. So she decided to come home and die. And
this is the next door neighbor.
Right,
yeah.
Across the fence.
Okay.
And she invited us over when she thought it was appropriate. And
yeah.
We talked to her, and then we left. And then she called my mother back, and she said, you know, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but we've talked about this before. If there's any way that I can connect with you on the other side, I'll do it. You know, it's something between us. And so the next day she went into a coma, and then she came out of it briefly, and she told her daughters, I see Bob, he's waiting for me. Bob was her deceased husband. And then she died the next day. And so a month went by, nothing happened. My mother was waiting for some kind of message, then 2 months, then 3. And then one day she was standing in her...
Down to 2 minutes.
Yeah. What she saw was this sphere of light coming from her friend's window with all these other lights in it.
Yeah.
And it kind of drifted away. And she said it was the most beautiful thing she has ever seen, and she felt that was her friend. So you're living in this kind of stuff in a situation where this happens, and then listening to all these people, the least I can say is that it's disoriented me.
You don't know what to believe.
Well, no, I know what to believe, but it's just disorienting. It's changed my view of what reality is. Mm-hmm. And there are not many people I can talk to about it, so somehow I've had to assimilate this on my own. And it's a little bit difficult, and it's a little bit isolating. So
you traveled to India, and we're down to a minute. What did you learn in India that lends to all of this?
I went with my friend who had a near-death experience.
Yes. He
went into surgery with an atheist. He came out chanting hymns to Shiva in Sanskrit. And we met with the Karmapa there and a bunch of other holy people. What I learned from that was I'm on my own.
You're on your own.
Yeah.
We're all on our own.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you know, Mel, I'm so grateful to you that you took this time to come and share.
There's a lot more to talk about.
I know. This is not something you could do in a half an hour, but we're out of time. And I hope that some of you who are confused got some clarity from what Mel has shared. And it's up to you to decide if you believe there is life after death or not. But I don't think 100 people would tell the same lie. So thank you for watching the Jennylyn Show. And I did this show to give peace to those who've lost loved ones. And hopefully, if you're watching this show and you've lost someone, it will. And I will see you next time. Thank you to my crew. And thank you to everyone for always watching us. See you next time.